Poison Ivy. You all know her, hopefully love her, and she's such a complex character that you can really go anywhere with her. But do you really want to break the streak she's got going? Poison Ivy as a character first appeared in the comics in Batman number 181 in June of 1966, where she uses her beauty and criminal know-how to try and prove that she is the #1 queen of crime. She tries to get both Batman and Bruce Wayne to show up to her party, which is just a bunch of criminals fighting, not much of a party. And when Batman shows up, she kisses him with chloroform. Clearly, she had less than romantic intentions for him, and this was going to be a means of an end in placing herself at the top of the food chain. But she's thwarted anyways, right off the bat. Huh. She's portrayed as a villain, and for a long time, that was all she was. However, as the political landscape changed and how the landscape of the Earth and the real world changed around us alongside it, it has become kind of hard to ignore the points she's making. And for some, they like to entertain the idea that maybe she's right. In some ways, she is. The environment is in desperate need of protection, and climate change is a plague on the Earth that needs to be put to a stop and reversed. Climate change is real, and the Earth is dying. I know. Liberal opinion there. But the thing is this really the character we want to use to illustrate our point? She's an eco-terrorist. She's very notably not reasonable in what she's doing. She's a villain. And if she's your spokesperson for environmental activism and change, it's not a good look. And that's not a fault of her character. If you take a look at her proper motivations, then you'll see that she doesn't really care about the environment. Or at least not the ecosystem at large. The part of the world she's trying to save is the green being the force of all plant life in the DC universe. Not animals, not the atmosphere, not people, just plants. And there is nothing she wouldn't be willing to cut down in order to guarantee their survival. There was no one, not even herself, for whom she would fully give up her goal for. As we see her in her most recent run, she is more than willing to die for this mission of hers. If you want a character to use for your environmental rallying, maybe consider Swamp Thing instead. I haven't read too much of him, but he's probably better than Ivy. Ivy may be the hot girl of the green and the Batman villain community, but a hero and justification, that is not. She's also just a liar for the fun of it. She loves lying. At every single opportunity, she'll just lie. Even when it has nothing to gain for her. She just wants to, so she does. Iconic, honestly. And I feel like I could confidently say that she's one of the scarier and deadlier Batman villains. Like, she kills over and over and over again with no remorse at all, and she's always willing to kill someone for the simple crime of getting in her way or annoying her. If even the Joker is saying that she's crazy, there's something there. Among the sirens, it's easy to say straight up that she's the biggest monster. Harley is straddling the line between hero and villain, and Selina's been an anti-hero for a very long time. Ivy, on the other hand, is motivated by a want to kill all of humanity, and she gets a lot done in that. In terms of Ivy, however, there's a lot to talk about in the regards to the fact she's evil, that she's a villain, and the other parts of her identity that shape this and that affect the way she's perceived in her place as one. Pick my teeth and go in for your heart of weeds. I think the biggest thing that changes the way that she's perceived, both in real life and the meta context that comes with it, and very clearly in the universe that she exists with. I feel like lately, there's been a trend within DC that female villains, especially in the Batman space, have been getting further and further away from being evil. It's like their alignment got shifted up a road to neutral whatever rather than evil. They've been defanged and declawed to be the good ones. But before that, there was so much there with Ivy. It's really important to me, both as an Ivy fan and as a woman, to talk about how her womanhood affects her characterization and the world as she sees it. She's not just any villain. She's not just any in-universe eco-terrorist. She's not Ra's al fucking Ghul. And not even because she just isn't Ra's. There's so much separating the two, despite semi-similar motivations at times. Her femininity is another tool in her arsenal. Just like her plants, it's just as much of a part of her as it is her weapon. Even more so than just her femininity, her beauty and her sexuality are some of the things she uses most to get what she wants. It's another poison to her, just as deadly as it is striking. Throughout most of her appearances, she uses the fact that she's this gorgeous woman in order to get close to those who've either wronged her or have something she wants. She gets into their beds, not to sleep with them, but instead to have an easier way to stab them in the back, where she doesn't have to worry about a witness or much cleanup on her part. She does this with no remorse. She doesn't mourn for the lives she's taken, nor does she regret taking them. All to further her mission. Their bodies will nourish the soil needed for her plants to grow and flourish. From a meta perspective, maybe it isn't the best. Maybe it isn't super great that the highly sexual woman is portrayed as the villain who needs to be stopped. Maybe it isn't amazing that a woman with a seemingly high sex drive is evil and just out to get the men. But as a look into Ivy's character, it really does tell you a lot. It's also hard to ignore the way that Ivy's relationships and dynamics with women differ from those she has with men. When a young woman comes to her, she doesn't immediately chase her off, she's in at her throat. She hears out what the foolish mortal before her has to say, and she agrees to help her. A young woman begs for her mercy, begs her to let her live. Ivy agrees to let her live, leaving behind the doomed man she sentenced to death around her. A woman tells her she doesn't like the way her boss makes her feel. Ivy speeds up her plans to slaughter him. The slaughter is less than the cold end she had intended. The only man that I recall her ever giving the same level of respect or attempt to stop the death of was one she'd known for much longer than any of these women, and who she was effectively sure was a saint. To reach the same standards for her, a man has to do more than the simple asking or implying, yeah, man-hating feminist or whatever. And in some places she really is. She's just mean to these guys, but can you really blame her when almost all of her experiences with men have been negative? Either you have Jason Woodrue, who I'll get into more later, or you have the countless men who just want to sleep with her, or have hurt those who she deems of higher importance than the rest of the world, namely, her plants and the world she's built herself from them. So, she hates men, she hates dealing with them. When she doesn't have to, she often just ends up killing any she does work with just because they piss her off thoroughly enough. She thinks all they do is lie and cheat and cause problems. If you have her friendships, she also tends to be closer to the women in her life. Like, yes, she's friends with Croc and Swamp Thing, but do they really have anything on her and Harley? Her and Catwoman? Hardly. Then again, there's also the way that she's often the one woman in the boys' club that is Batman villains. If there's a group shot, it's probable that she's the only girl there. She's the sexy one among the monsters, despite being just as much of a monster as all of the rest of them are. Sometimes even more so, like, compare her to the Riddler, and there is a bigger monster between them. In a way, she's the only real female villain that has any major mainstream prevalence. Harley's still riding off the pressure of being a sidekick, and Catwoman is kind of an anti-hero and has been for a while. Among these other villains, however, there is the fact that she's still the eye candy. She's the one who they'll smash together with Batman to give another hot girl all over him. She's got tits and ass and vines. She's the sex appeal of the rogues gallery. There's also another thing in relation to her femininity that isn't directly tied to her sexuality, being, of course, her sexuality. Cannibal girlfriend, she liked the taste of my heart. I want to preface by saying that in this segment and the next, I use the term queer a lot as a descriptor. If this term is potentially triggering or uncomfortable for you, or you just don't want to hear it, here's the best place to stop watching. I use the word in a neutral to positive way, but I know that some people are uncomfortable with the word regardless, so I'm warning you now. Thank you. I feel like in order to truly dissect this, though, you have to look past her relationship with Harley, and this sounds really hard since it is right there, and she's here, and she's queer, and she's got all of that going on. I'm also, very sadly, going to be ignoring a lot of Poison Ivy 2022 for this, because it's again right there. It's canon, and that's really amazing, but there's still the question of why and how is Ivy queer? Because she didn't just become queer the first time the editors decided to let her kiss Harley. She didn't start to be readable as queer when she met Harley Quinn. In the same way that it's important to look beyond the Joker when talking about Harley, you have to look past Harley to talk about Ivy's queerness in its true form. And when you do that, and when you look back at Ivy in the past, it's impossible to, with modern knowledge, not see her as queer. Or at least it was to me. Well, I know I have a bias, both because I'm looking at her knowing now that she's queer and because I myself am a queer woman, but I know I'm not projecting. What definitely stood out to me the most wasn't even her dialogue with any of the women she speaks with it to at any point. It was a series of a few panels that she shared with Batman. She tells him she knows he loves her, and he looks at her and he tells her she doesn't know what love is. And while I was reading this in Batman Poison Ivy, it just hit me. And to me, I don't think she's ever been attracted to men. I think she's a lesbian. Her real relationships with men are few and far between, and when you look closer, you don't really believe that she wants them. One of the ones that influence her character the most, which is the earliest one we learn of, is established in Neil Gaiman's origin story for Ivy, Pavane, or at least I think that's how you say it. In this, Jason Woodrue is Ivy's professor, and also the man who turns her into Poison Ivy. He's also, however, her lover. Lover's the wrong word for it. He's using her, and instead of just doing it scientifically, he added a far more predatory aspect to it. A man in his middle age sleeping with a barely legal woman, all the while using her as his test subject in his experimentation, that's what we call a total creep. Poison Ivy 2022 looks back on this and instead of sanitizing it, just makes it more obvious that he was a total predator. And while reading the story, it was also very hard to separate it from the author, especially considering the things that have come out about Gaiman semi-recently. And honestly, I think it just adds to the story, even though it's clearly unintentional. Hindsight is 2020, and here, hindsight just adds to my point. My point being that in one of Ivy's only prevalent relationships with men, it is very much more her being preyed on than it is any actual love or attraction to him. Then there's the other main man in her life. This, of course, being Batman, but like a lot of his villains, I feel like this is more of an obsession than it is any true infatuation or love or affection or attraction to him. Again, bringing up those panels, when Ivy tries to express what she thinks her feelings for him are, he denies her. And not only does he deny that he feels anything for her, he denies that she really feels anything for him. And any time that she does get him, any time that he loves her, it's not real. Take The Long Halloween, the only reason they're even close to together is because he's under her mind control. For example, in World's Finest, number 251, she has an ex-lover who she's turned into a tree monster. In the next issue, it's explained that this was her professor when she was younger who got her into a relationship with him and then used her to steal an ancient herb for him before attempting to kill her, for something to be a trend. And at his severe injury, she simply bemoans the loss of a tool rather than that of someone she truly cared about, despite having a whole thing about how she only turned him into a tree because he betrayed her. She didn't care about him. She cared about the insolence that would have been felt if she'd let him cheat her and get away with it. She didn't give a fuck about him. She just wanted another use for someone who turned her back on her, who turned his back on her. It was revenge more than anything else. And even though she contradicts that little backstory of hers in Pavane, when we are first introduced to Woodrue, I'm just gonna take it anyways. This goes for any man she's with for a long time. It's always really just a ploy. It doesn't mean anything to her, even when she wants it to. For the men she's with for mere moments in her almost 60-year-long history, this goes tenfold. They're always just for the ploy, just to get close enough to kill without a second thought. She's not even implied to be attracted to any of these men. It's a mean to an end, and usually that end happens to be theirs. There's also a little moment in Batman Legends of the Dark Knight number 43 where she says she's nobody's baby when a guy she's selling her stock of drugs to tries to flirt. She emphasizes this point. She doesn't date men, she uses them. But she doesn't say that part out loud, does she? In the same issue, she says that all of the men she's been with have just ruined her life, and she thinks Batman is one of them. Her pheromones attract men to her, but when has she ever really wanted them? I don't think she ever has. Her relation to men and her perceived attractiveness to them is just a tool for her, another thing for her to use against them. She just wants the power that men can give her. She doesn't want the man himself. Compare that to her relationships with women, where her body doesn't seem to be nearly as important. What's important there is the genuine connection. At one point, Harley essentially calls Ivy and Catwoman out for arguing like a married couple, and yeah, I can get those vibes too. And with the queer body, there's also a case to be made for her as a transgender allegory. Now, you could say that I'm being very cut and dry with this transformation. Boom. It means there's a metaphor for the transgender in there. And well, yes, a little bit. It's also the sharp distinction between the before and after of the transformation, even just in the way that Ivy perceives herself. The way she views Pamela Isley and Poison Ivy are very different. When she talks about the before, she talks about the nerdy and lame Pamela Isley who only cared about academics and who boys never noticed. She shows disdain for the way she looked as a child. Then she becomes a woman, this woman not being Dr. Pamela Isley, this woman being Poison Ivy, this bold, genius, sensual femme fatale, with everyone's eyes on her. It's very clear to see that she's far more comfortable with herself after having gone through this transformation. And even though it may have been traumatic and she might have gotten a lot of backlash for it, it still landed her better off on the other side. No longer is she poor little Pamela Isley. Now she is the master of the green. She is a goddess walking among mortals. She is the earth's savior. She will be the executioner of countless deaths. She's more now than she ever could have been before. And she doesn't mind all that she's lost in the progress. No, not now that she has all this. She is the divine feminine. And I guess, since I'm talking about Ivy in relation to queerness, I don't really have a choice in talking about Harley, even though I really don't want to. I talked about separating her from her main love interest. Why can't I separate Ivy from hers? Probably because I'm talking about queerness here, whatever. But I will talk about it, and Harley is really important. Because this was the earliest queer. Ever since the 90s, when they first interacted in Batman the Animated Series, they've been heavily queer-coded. And, it's been pretty explicit from the beginning. Not exactly just best friend behavior to walk around the house you're both living in with no pants on. Repeatedly. And honestly, it is just a major show of trust and friendship that Ivy inoculated Harley against all of her poisons and toxins that she could touch her without dying. Ivy doesn't do that for the people she's friends with. There's a lot more care and intimacy there. Especially with Ivy, who doesn't care if anyone around her lives or dies. Even Catwoman, who she's often very, very close to, doesn't have this privilege. Ivy barely has friendships, but she still made sure to do this for Harley. And then, moving forward in the timeline, they did confirm them to be a couple, and this is a really good ship, with a lot of solid characterization and good chemistry when done right. So, thanks Harley for proving my point. Then again, the canonization of her queerness hasn't all been sunshine and rainbows for her characterization. For queer characters in mainstream media, there's been a little bit of a trend where they can only drift so far from the squeaky clean sanitization of a kids' show. For a lot of these massive companies, they see that the only good representation is good representation. The characters have to be bastions of morality in order to make sure that everyone's happy. The most we get is something like Hazbin Hotel, which is a whole other problem, to be honest, which I will not be talking about now or ever. But I'm not happy with this. For one thing, it loses a lot of the depth and interest, especially with a character who has always been meant to be a villain. If everything that makes her truly evil is sanded away, it's exhausting. You cannot make Poison Ivy a hero without fundamentally changing who she is as a character. Yes, she can have her good moments and she has her morals, but she's far from a good person. At best, she's
sometimes very, very dark gray.
And she deserves to be able to be that way. She deserves to be able to be queer and evil at once. There's a difference between acknowledging that a character's motivations are based, in some ways, in true righteousness, and also knowing that they are very wrong. This is Ivy. And it's very easy to look at her and to see the right thing. She wants to save the earth. Mother Nature is her guide. But there is still so much deeper to her motivations, and that part is where it goes awry. She's a bad person. Her version of saving the earth is killing off every single human being. The green drives her forward to get rid of all that opposes her. Her plants will survive the rest of the world, and that's what she wants. A hero she is not. She despises humanity. To her, it is a plague upon the earth, and she is the doctor to cut out the tumor. I remember a while ago there was a Tumblr poll. I think it was a poll, and I don't remember much about it, but I remember the replies. There was a bunch of people who were all saying they didn't like Ivy because she didn't work with other activists in the eco space. But why would she? They want to stop climate change that humanity and the earth can work together to continue living for millennia to come. Why would they want Poison Ivy to work with them? She would kill them as soon as their goals stopped being compatible. She'd give them a bad name. She believes they are just as much part of the problem just because they are human. And she hates that simple fact. But a lot of the world doesn't want to see her that way, and I think in part she's been dragged down by Harley, and I love Harley, but in past years, Harley has become so popular that DC thought it would be cool to make her into a hero or at least an anti-hero. And since Ivy is so strongly associated with Harley nowadays that it's hard to separate the two, Ivy has gotten dragged up the morality scale to match her freak. I wish we didn't have to, mainly because I wish that Harley also wasn't dragged into being an anti-hero. I think the best thing we've had for Ivy right now really is good. Poison Ivy 2022 has been an amazing story, and while this essay wasn't about it, I do think everyone should read it. She gets to be unabashedly queer and also tries to kill people to get rid of humanity. Good for her. And I met the cover artist for the series, Jessica Fong, and she was so nice. If you want to turn a monster of the Batman mythos into a hero, or at least someone who isn't horrible, take Killer Croc. Croc, who is one of Ivy's only male friends, and is somehow more human than she is. Croc is a human with a very severe mutation that makes him look like a massive hulking crocodile. Ivy, meanwhile, is a woman who's been so dramatically shifted away from what she once was that you can barely call her human anymore. She is more plant than she is anything else. Just because she looks like she's still a beautiful woman with some occasional coloration issues, that doesn't change that functionally there's little left of her that is still the same as when she began. In Gotham City Sirens #8, she's distinctly inhuman. She comments on it explicitly, more plant than woman, almost killed by a lack of sunlight, and brought back by being watered. She has no relation to humanity anymore, and so, no sympathy. Killing a human is like killing a fly to her. Just a pest. I got very off track here at some point, but I love Poison Ivy so much, and I just need to talk about all of this. Everyone read Poison Ivy 2022. Thank you very much. Subscribe if you liked this. Um, Comment down below if you have any thoughts, and like the video. Thank you guys. Until next time, listeners.